Shapiro, thanks so much for coming on to talk about your mom, Eartha Kitt. And your name is Kitt, and we've established that it was Eartha Kitt. And why did she name you Kitt?
Well, I always said it was so that she wouldn't forget my name, but
how could she forget that? You're her only child.
I was going to be Kitt whether I was a boy or a girl, so there
Really?
wasn't much thought process here. I don't know what would have happened if she'd had more than one child. I would have been like the George Foreman of girls, maybe. But she used to often introduce us. We'd go to places and she'd say, "I'm Eartha, and this is Kitt," as if I completed her somehow.
Would it get a laugh, or would people?
People, I think, they thought it was cute. They, of course, then thought my name was Kitt, but my mother's married name was McDonald. She just didn't use it. She used, her maiden name as a stage name. So they got confused, but that, people thought it was very cute. People call me Kit or, Little Kit. But she really, she didn't have any family. So to give me her name was really important to her. She wanted her name to continue.
Let's talk about, and we're looking at a picture of you and your mom. Let's go back to your mom's childhood, and it was not a very happy childhood in the South. So tell me a little bit so that we can sort of build a foundation about, then she became this international star.
Right,
so what happened in her childhood?
She was born in a small town called North, South Carolina, and she was, her mother she knew not for a very brief moment, because her mother left early and gave her up, and then died very early on.
And of course that caused scars.
Yes.
She was given up by her mother, didn't know her father.
Didn't know her father. It was assumed that her father was white, because my mother was lighter skinned than everybody else around her, which was not easily accepted in the South, and she was born in 1927. And so she was often referred to as a yellow gal. And people didn't want you to be, they wouldn't have her. They didn't want to take her in.
Because she didn't fit in.
She didn't fit in. She didn't fit in. So she heard a lot, I won't have that yellow gal in my house. And because she was also illegitimate. So she had a lot of stigma attached to this little tiny thing that, she didn't speak very much. She was so scared of people because they treated her so badly. So she really had a tough time. Her mother then died after she'd given her away to a family who finally took her. The woman was blind, so she couldn't tell what her color was.
You couldn't make this up if you tried.
No, it was.
So she grew up where?
After she was in the South for her early years, and terribly mistreated by adults, by children, beaten, abused, all the stereotypes that you hear. And an aunt lived in New York City, and somebody wrote to this aunt and said that if you don't get this child out of here, they're going to kill her. They're just, she's like a toy to them, but an abusive toy. So the aunt sent for her to come to New York, and my mother then came up to Harlem. She'd never seen a train, elevated trains. She'd never seen indoor plumbing. She'd never seen, it was like right out of the story. They dressed her in every piece of clothing she had. They put her on the train with she would say these little sardine sandwiches with white bread. And, she gets off the train, and this woman who was very tall and regal, and my mother's part Cherokee Indian, and this woman, the aunt, was very much Cherokee looking. And my mother describes, she died many, many years ago, so I wasn't alive to meet her. And she took her to this apartment, and my mother had to go to the bathroom, so she asked, I don't know if she asked or she realized she was uncomfortable, and she made her go into this room, which was basically a closet. And my mother she thought she was being punished. I mean, she'd never seen indoor plumbing. She didn't know what to do. So she sat there on the side of the bathtub for the longest time.
I can't even imagine.
Till the woman comes in and finally realizes that she didn't know what to do.
So she comes to New York and is raised by her aunt. Then what happens? I mean, how does she end up being discovered? What happens?
Well, she would always dance around and play around. She loved music.
And she was 5'2", right? A little bitty
little
thing.
Tiny, really petite little thing. And one day she was walking down the street with a girlfriend, and a young girl had a list of makeup that she asked, "Where's the makeup store?" I don't know what the store was. And my mother said to her, "Why do you have the whole list? You're such a young girl. What do you need all that makeup for?" And she said, "Well, I work for Katherine Dunham, who had the Katherine Dunham Dance Company at the time." And she said, "Miss Dunham sent me out to get all of this makeup for her." And so somehow a discussion came around, and my mother was dared by her friends to go audition for the dance company, and she did, and she won a scholarship, and she joined the company, and they started touring the country, the world, and that's where she was in Paris with the company when Orson Welles discovered her in Paris.
And what happened there?
Orson Welles cast her in his production of Faust, and he was really, he adored her. But really, I mean, she would say that she would go with him to dinner and just sit there and with all these unbelievably artistic people and just listen and soak it all up. And it was just, she was like a sponge.
So she starts to sing, she starts to act. Why did she take off? What was it? Because she was so different?
I think because she was different. She had a voice that really nobody could identify. She was exotic. She had the sort of that Lena Horne-esque to her, where this regalness, but this incredible beauty. She had a presence. When she walked into a room, as tiny as she was, people were shocked. They would think that she, when they would stand next to her, they said, "I can't believe how tiny you are. I would have thought you were 5'10" or 5'9". She had a sense of self that I think that just sort of radiated.
That she had to find herself, because she certainly wasn't given that as a child.
No, but I think her instincts were, her given name was Eartha, and she truly was of the earth, and she truly was connected to the universe and the spiritual world and the environment. She was, it was all about the earth to her, water and taking care of the earth and growing your own food. I mean, that's what she learned in the South, but she carried that throughout her entire life. So I think that, what she came into this world born connected to everything around her and a part of it. And she really was always true to herself. Whenever she made a decision, she listened to her gut, always did. And the few times that she didn't, she would say, that's because I didn't, I second-guessed myself, or I listened to somebody else.
We have some pictures of your mom with a lot of stars.
Yes.
Marilyn Monroe, Sidney Poitier, Sammy Davis Jr., the Queen of England. Do you remember her talking to you about what it was like to meet the Queen of England, coming from her meager beginnings?
I think my mother was just very curious, and she wanted to meet Albert Einstein. And so she asked her agents to, set up a meeting, and they was like, Albert Einstein's not going to meet with you. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. So she said, ask him. And they did, and he said yes. And so she went to Princeton and sat with him for, hours. I was telling the kids that my children, one day we found a picture, a menu from Winston Churchill, a luncheon that my mother went to with him and his wife, and he signed it, and his wife signed it. And there's a picture with Winston Churchill and my mother. And I said to them, I bet you that none of your friends can say that their grandmother had lunch with Winston Churchill.
Can you even imagine? So she becomes this star, and we all know her from Santa Baby, and we all know her as Catwoman from the Batman movie. And I said to you before we started, people want to know where the purr came from. And you ascertained it was before she was a big star. She started this.
Yes, she started. When she went to Paris, she learned how to speak French.
This
obviously,
is the picture of her as Catwoman.
Catwoman, that's right. She was really the quintessential Catwoman. The irony was she only did, I think maybe 4 episodes, but people associate her with that character
from the '60s.
Yes. She said that she learned the purr from just practicing vocal exercises in the bathroom, and then from learning different languages, because she would speak and sing in different Turkish and Japanese and Spanish, German.
How did she do all of that? All these different languages. I mean, she grabbed onto life.
Yes.
Once it became in front of her and just didn't let go. It seems to me. She learned, she took it in, went for
and
the
she
gusto.
truly believed it. When I would travel with her, and I did,
And you
took
managed
me,
your career for 20
yes,
years,
I worked
25?
for Eartha Kitt Productions and produced her tours and her albums and a lot of her shows. But as a little girl, she took me all around the world with her because she felt that travel was the best education you could possibly have. You couldn't learn any of this in books.
Let's talk about apartheid in South Africa when you went with your mom. What happened? Because this is an important story.
Yes.
People need to
So
hear.
I grew up very sophisticated and traveling. We lived in London, we lived in Los Angeles, and I went to French schools. So I was very sophisticated. We went to South Africa in 1974, which was during apartheid, which was not well received by a lot of people because they felt that my mother was not being true to, to standing for what was right and wrong. And my mother felt that artists were the true diplomats because they don't have to use all the protocol and be politically correct. They can go and they can make change. They can work outside the boundaries of whatever the State Department or the politicians have to. So she agreed to go to South Africa, but she also made it statement that she would only perform for integrated audiences, which of course was not how South Africa operated at the time. And while we were there, she also wanted to raise money to build schools for African children. So we went, and I was 13 years old. It's not like I was, a little tiny thing. I was old enough to know what was going on and understand how things worked. But what was really interesting, it was the first time I realized that my mother and I were different. Now, we were there as VIPs, and my mother was able to go anywhere, as was I. Had we been born there and resident, from the country, we would not have been. I would have been considered colored, even though I was passive. My color is
even though
white
you look
enough,
white.
right?
Yes.
And my mother would also have been considered colored, which was sort of one step better off than the black Africans, but not as good as the Afrikaans, who are the white Africans. So I went one evening to see Margot Fonteyn. I was a ballet dancer and I loved Margot Fonteyn. So I went to see her dance Swan Lake with friends of my mother's. And we're in this big opera house in Cape Town, and people are whispering this big gala, and my mother was not there. My mother was performing. And they're like, oh, that's Eartha Kitt's daughter. That's Eartha Kitt's daughter. And yeah, I'm 13 years old. I'm thinking, wow, I'm really important. People actually know who I am. That's pretty cool. The next day, I found my mother proudly stated that the reason people were saying all that was because it was a whites-only theater. And technically, I wouldn't have been allowed to be there. So I was breaking the law. That's why people were talking that, that
Did that hurt you? As you were sophisticated, but you were only 12 or 13. Did you understand really what was going on, that you may be a little bit better than your mom because you were lighter skinned? I mean, what were the mixed messages going on there?
I don't really think at the time I understood that because my mother wasn't with me at that theater, so she wasn't being treated differently. Later on that same trip, we were at an amusement park. I traveled with a tutor whenever we went on the road, and my tutor and he was British. We would go to this amusement park in Durham, in South Africa, and we went every day, and I kept saying to my mother, you've got to come to this amusement park, it's so much fun, the bumper cars and the this, and she had rehearsals and press conferences, and so one day finally, towards the end of our stay, she said, okay, I'll go with you. So she came, and we were on the bumper cars, and the bumper cars stopped all of a sudden, and somebody who worked there came over, and he said to my mother, excuse me, ma'am, are you European? And she said, no, I'm American. And he said, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, are you colored? And she looked at her skin and she said, well, I guess if you consider this colored, then I'm colored. And he said, well, this is a whites-only park, so you're not allowed to be here. So my mother calmly stood up and started to leave the park. And I am screaming like a typical teenager, don't you tell him tell him who you are. Tell him that you can be here. We have VIP status. You could go anywhere you want. You don't have to live by the rules of the country. It's different. You're not the same. And she would say to me, don't panic, which is on your wrist. Don't panic. Everything happens for a reason. God may not be there when you want him, but he's always on time. And she very calmly left. And she didn't say anything the rest of the day. I, of course, was pouting and crying and throwing a tantrum. And 2 days later, she was having a press conference, and the photographers asked to have her take a picture overlooking the amusement park. And she said, "Oh, it's very funny. I was thrown out of that park the other day." Well,
Headlines?
The headlines, and the owner of the park was so apologetic and so, he said, "What can I do to make it up to you? Anything you want." And she said, "Well, we're building these schools, so for African children, your donation would be really welcome." So he wrote a check, and he gave us, tickets to go to the amusement park. And so my mother went back. She brought 2 white children and 2 black children and 2 colored children. And that was how, she was not one to stand up on a soapbox and scream and yell and make a big scene, which is how I would have done it, I think. She was one who makes change in very subtle ways, but yet it was very loud in its subtlety.
You brought in some goodies, I think,
Yes.
Some writings on hotel stationery and in books. There are obviously favorite sayings, and you have started to develop a business now called Simply Eartha,
Yes.
and the Kitt-isms.
Right.
Did some of these Kitt-isms, her sayings like "don't panic" and other things, are there favorites?
Well, my mother she coined them Kitt-isms during her life because, and she didn't make any of these up. These are not necessarily, unique to her. But once she said them, they were hers. And they don't even try to tell her differently. They were a Kitt-ism, and a Kitt-ism was a Kitt-ism. And she would write everything down. When she died, which is now 4.5 years ago.
Of colon cancer.
Of colon cancer, yes. An unnecessary cancer to die from. I found through all of her belongings, pieces of paper. You see, you have writings on everything, from Post-it notes to hotel stationery
And how
to
special is
napkins,
that you have that?
And my mother said to me before she died, "Don't throw anything away. Don't throw it away. Everything I have done is for you. It's going to be used somehow. It's going to be able to be used someday. So don't throw it away." So of course I was terrified to throw it away. But what do you do with all these pieces of paper? So after she died, 2 years after she died, I decided to do a little book for close friends of ours, of my mother's and of who touched our lives. And so I took some of her Kitt-isms in her own handwriting even. I made it, just did it on my computer, on my own.
And the cover's Santa Baby.
And the cover was it was Santa Baby.
Which you're not getting the royalties from.
Well, I'm getting her vocal. Yes, I do get her vocal royalties.
Oh, good.
But not. She didn't compose it. So.
Good.
But
so
I
you're
do
getting
get.
something.
Yes.
That's awesome.
We've put in all these Kitt-isms, some fabulous pictures that I have, and Kitt-isms, and people really responded to them. So on our Facebook page, which we have Facebook, The Eartha Kitt, I started to post a lot of these, which you had pictures up a few minutes ago, and the fans really respond to them. So then I'm thinking, well, now wait a minute. I have her handwriting, which is her philosophy, her spirit. I also have some images that are unique that nobody else has. I'm going to maybe combine those, and people seem to really like them. So I've decided to, with Simply Eartha,
.com.
we have her pieces of home decor items,
Pillows
and
and
blankets, mugs, wall
And made
art.
in the USA. You said that
Well,
was
my mother was
important.
very much made in the USA. If you gave her something that was made in China or made overseas, she would give it back to you. So she was green before it was chic and trendy to be green. We had a vegetable garden and chickens in our house
In Beverly Hills, you
Hills.
said.
She truly believed that if it didn't come from the earth, you didn't eat it, and if it was processed, it wasn't good. It wasn't good to eat. So that's how she lived. She said it has to be, anything that she buys would preferably be made in the USA. Not so easy to find all the time. But I knew that if I was going to be designing and making items, if I didn't have it all made in the United States, that somehow she was going to come, I was going to hear from her. Something was coming out.
So what are you doing with your company, Simply Eartha? There's a give back piece to this
Yes,
company.
the give back piece is to the Colon Cancer Alliance, because colon cancer is the second largest killer of cancers in the United States, which most people don't realize. I think they assume it's breast cancer and maybe other types. Lung cancer is number 1 and colon cancer is number 2. And it is the easiest to
Have a colonoscopy.
to find and to treat. And you know, when you have a colonoscopy, if they find a polyp, they literally, during the procedure, they remove it and it's done. And it doesn't develop into anything more than that. So it's really an unfortunate, you know, my mother was always healthy, so she didn't go to the doctor because she didn't have to. So she didn't have
She was
to.
bigger than life, she thought, right?
Yeah, she was.
So you have the company that you're going to expand and get her Kitt-isms out there and some other things. What do you miss most about your mom and who she was?
Well, I miss her centeredness. There was that peace that she had, that sort of, she wasn't easily flustered, you know, so she was always, you knew that if she was in the room that there was, you know, sort of a solid, an anchor. I also miss, I mean, I was her absolute be all and end all. I mean, there's just no doubt about that.
Because Dad wasn't around.
Right. My parents divorced very, very young, when I was very, very young. And it was just my mother and I. And, you know.
This picture is gorgeous that we just saw.
Oh, and with us at the window. What do I miss? I miss her laughing at all my jokes. My children don't laugh at any of my jokes. They don't think I'm funny at all. My mother thought I was hysterical. She thought I was the greatest thing that was, you know, ever invented.
And did she impart anything to you about Hollywood? Was it good to her? Had she had it by the time she retired? Because she sang for a long time and toured.
Right. She worked up until, I mean, she died Christmas Day, 2008. Her last concert was with the Virginia Symphony, September 2008. So it was only 2 months prior to her death. And 90-minute concert she gave, you know, with the symphony orchestra. She really felt that her fans were what had kept her alive. She loved her fans. To her, it wasn't about owning, you know, big important pieces of art or jewelry or anything fancy. To her, it was the pieces that her fans had given her, that had made for her or sent her. She kept everything, everything. And she could then tell you who gave it to her, where it was, you know, with the story behind it.
In some ways, they were her family.
Yeah, they were her family. They were the ones who stood by her and supported her in the times when, you know, she wasn't sure where her next meal was coming from.
Kitt Shapiro, thanks so much for coming on and imparting
very
some
welcome.
of the Kitt-isms and all the wonderful things that you're
Thank
doing
you.
for colon cancer through your mom.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.